Um, Good morning. We'd like to call the meeting to order. The agenda for the Oxnard City Council Public Works and Transportation Committee meeting for October 13th, starting time 11 a.m. We're actually starting 11:03. The roll call, posting of the agenda, and the flag salute. May we have the roll call, Madam Clerk, please?
Member
You can be
Flynn.
chair if she wants.
Okay.
Member Flynn.
Present.
Member McDonald.
Here.
Chair Perlow.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum. The agenda for this meeting was posted in the City Hall kiosk on Wednesday, October 7th.
Yeah. Councilman McDonald, will you lead us in the flag salute? And we take a moment of silence for Mr. Van Halen that passed away, very prominent musician in this country.
Sure. Please join me in saluting the flag of our nation by saying, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Clerk, as we go along, if there's any changes with the public comments or anybody wishing to speak, please let me know. I did not receive any notifications of anybody wishing to speak on public comment. Does that still stand?
That's correct.
Okay. Going on to the first agenda item, consent agenda, item C1, approval of the minutes.
Move the recommended action.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member
Madam
Flynn.
Clerk.
Member Flynn.
Aye.
Member McDonald.
Yes.
Chair Perlow.
Yes.
The motion to approve carries 3-0.
Moving on to reports. We had nothing under B, but moving on to reports, D1. We do have a speaker on this D1 when it gets to the comments. The item is, the subject is purchase order to Eagle Aerial Photography Incorporated for water conservation software. And the recommendation that the Public Works and Transportation Committee recommend the City Council approve and authorize the city manager to execute a purchase order and sole source authorization with Eagle Aerial Photography Incorporated for a 3-year term in the amount of $126,675 for a subscription to WaterView, a water conservation software.
Good morning, committee chair and committee members Flynn and McDonald. I'm Megan Schneider, water conservation coordinator. Thank you for reading the recommendation.
You're welcome.
Okay, so some background. In May 2018, Senate Bill 606 and Assembly Bill 1668 were enacted, collectively titled Making Water Conservation a California Way of Life. These bills work together to create a framework for long-term water conservation in California to address the droughts, the persistent dry years, as well as water shortages. Within this new legislation, water suppliers will have to develop a system-wide water use target. And a component of this target is the calculation of the efficient outdoor residential water use. For the calculation of the efficient outdoor residential water use, we will have to have the total square footage for all residential parcels within the city and assign an efficient amount of water to each of those square foot. The State Department of Water Resources will be providing basic data to us by fall 2020. So actually currently we should be receiving this data within a few weeks. And then once we receive that data, we will have 6 months to verify the estimates and work with DWR to revise the data if needed. So WaterView is a web-based water efficiency software. It integrates high-resolution GIS imagery data, demographic data, evapotranspiration data, city water consumption data, and Eagle-generated irrigated vegetation data. The Eagle-generated irrigated vegetation data, this is a remote sensing and infrared technology to accurately identify different types of vegetation and landscapes. It is able to identify turf versus hardscapes, as well as hardscape patios versus shadows that objects might cast. This software is more sophisticated than other types of software and is able to identify minor ground changes from year to year. So WaterView will assist us in verifying initial data estimates efficiently and can produce the data needed by DWR to support changes in order for Oxnard to receive its fair allocation. WaterView can also identify residential customers who can maximize water use efficiency, and it will help us design targeted conservation programs. This will be great for having the greatest impact and best cost-benefit analysis when developing these programs. And WaterView will also assist us to meet future reporting required by DWR. Eagle aerial photography was selected on a sole source basis. Eagle aerial was selected by DWR as a sole source because of their 90 to 95% level of accuracy with landscape classification. And to meet DWR standards, we have selected them as a sole source. Oxnard's GIS team supports this project due to WaterView's high resolution mapping and specialized algorithms that help identify landscape types and spatial areas. This software is able to provide this accuracy, which no other software is able to. Funding is available in fiscal year 2020 to 2021 within Water Operating Fund 601 for $40,815. In subsequent fiscal years, remaining funds will be requested in the respective budgets. That concludes my presentation. I could take any questions.
We do have, are there any technical questions that the committee would like to ask? And we'll leave discussion for after the public comment, but are any technical questions committee members have? Mayor Flynn?
No.
Councilman McDonald?
No.
Okay, one public comment from Mr. James Aragon.
Hi, James. We're on item D1 and you have 3 minutes. Please begin.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, gentlemen, and Michelle.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I have a few questions about the road ahead for this initiative. First of all, the GIS technology, it's really cool stuff. I got to do it when I was in intelligence in the Air Force. I have no problem with the purchase and subscription to this service. I'm not a big fan of the law that was passed by the legislature, but here we are. And so I think this is the right path to get organized for the city of Oxnard. For context, I live in a 5-bedroom house with 5 people. We are a green and thumb home with a beautiful small backyard. I'm in the East Village, so I think you know how small the backyards there are. But the neighbor to our left has a 5-bedroom home. There's 9 people living there. Their backyard is completely paved over. The neighbor to our right is a 4-bedroom, which is a single person living there, a lovely lady. But her backyard is also paved over. And neither of our neighbors have much care for greenery. That's an observation, not a criticism. And so my question is really kind of like, what's the long-term path here about how we're going to implement these things? I mean, we use what the average household in America uses as far as water goes. I think we had our highest month of the year this past month, and I think we did 84 gallons per person per day. I don't know how we're going to get down to 55. We'll see what we can do. But I'm curious as how the parcel by parcel approach will be taken in assessing outdoor water usage. Like I said, we have greenery and we have, drought-proof plants, lots of we call those plants that are, I'm not the gardener, obviously, but hardy, don't need a lot of water, but it's green. It's green back there, and it's really nice. And so I'm wondering, when they do this overhead and they're looking at some gardens and some paved over areas, whether or not that's sort of going to be some sort of future prevention. If someone wants to unpave their backyard and put in grass and some greenery, or puts in a pool. And so I'm just curious to how that will work out. Also, how does the city envision identifying how a customer account would need to improve water efficiency? So we have large, nice homes here on my street, and some people have 9 people, some people have 5, some people have 1. And so I'm wondering how thank you. That efficiency is going to be calculated, how the city's going to know how many people are living in each home and what each household's actual requirements are. And that's a curiosity I have. Also, I'm curious to how fines will be absorbed. Per household, a normal year of fines, a maximum fine would be $10,000 per household per year in Oxnard, with 36,000 households. For a dry year, it would be $8 per household per month. And I'm just curious to whether or not there's an ability here for the city council to build in fines to water delivery rates and then rebate if goals are met. Anyways, I have lots of curiosity about what the strategic implementation plan is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aragon. You've asked a lot of questions. Hope that they're really, because you mentioned just out of curiosity. I mean, I hope it wasn't just out of curiosity. I mean, those are valid questions. I think I would assume you took your time to ask valid questions. Any staff member that willingly will tackle Mr. Aragon's questions to the best of their ability, I'm eager to give the opportunity to hear.
Yeah, so he mentioned an allocation per residential parcel and how they will meet these goals. And it is important to remember that these targets are a system-wide target, and residents themselves will not be, they won't be fined, or they won't be required to meet that goal. It is a system-wide target. So the city as a total will have to meet that target. So that is the city's responsibility. And we will do this by, and this software is a great tool because we'll be able to identify places where we are able to improve water efficiency and implement programs to improve this. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. If we do have, if anybody from the water department is there, could they please come to the podium?
Hello, Chair. Omar Castro, Water Division Manager.
Hello, Mr. Castro. Thank you very much for coming to the podium. The gentleman asked a question. He doesn't understand how we're going to get down to a certain number if there's a requirement. I would just like to pose a hypothetical question to you, not just theoretical, a hypothetical question. If the city doesn't have the water to deliver, how would we get down to that low level? How would you distribute water if you did not have it to deliver?
Sure. The major component to this is really outreach and education, where we can spend more time with our customers, showing them how they can manage the resource better. And we're currently working on some of this, doing curbside pickup, handing out smart use nozzles and aerators. So there's still a lot more that we can do to help our customers out and trying to help them achieve that goal of 55 gallons per day.
Thank you very much. Because just a common sense one, if we don't have the water to deliver to this public speaker, we're not going to be able to deliver it to you. That's how we're trying to avoid that situation. But sometimes Mother Nature takes a big hand in these things. So thank you, Mr. Castro, for coming to the podium. Does council members have any questions or deliberations on this point?
I just have a few comments, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
And I'll be honest here, I think I'm not a big fan of people flying over my house and using high-tech software and cameras to see exactly what I've got in my yard and everything else. Not that there's anything illegal back there or I've got any secrets, but that's just me as an individual. It's kind of like having a smartphone that listens to you all day long and you don't realize it until it starts talking about stuff that you were talking about earlier, but that's just me. And I think Mr. Castro hit the nail on the head when he talked about public involvement and education and so on and so forth. I know I monitor my water bill pretty religiously, and I noticed a trend where the water usage had gone up significantly, and I had not changed any of my patterns. I only water twice a week for 5 minutes a circuit, and we finally traced it to a leak in the pool. And the real frustrating thing about it was I called 4 or 5 pool repair companies, and every one of them to the person said, "We're too busy right now. It's too small a job. We're not interested." So I had to get a leak person to come out and patch it with epoxy just to stop the leak. And it's not pretty. It's actually pretty ugly, but I think we need to be understanding as a city sometimes that sometimes even with our best efforts to repair things as quickly as possible, it may take some time. And I hope we're understanding of that. And I know that when we adopted rates a couple years ago, we made allocations for people with larger lots so that they don't get held to the smaller lot size usage. So those are just general comments. I support this. I think the overall goal is good. I'm just not a fan of having people fly over and take pictures of my house, but it is what it is. So I'll support this.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Mr. Flynn, do you have any comments?
I do. And I want to make sure I stay focused on the actual item. The presenter included and said that there would be demographic data. And I'm wondering if this, to help reach the goals, if the demographic data is based on what that's based on. Is it based on the census or what's it based on?
Yeah, it's based on population data, and this comes from the census as well as the Southern California Associate of Governments.
So I don't, Mr. Chair and Committee Member McDonald, I don't want to get too much into this, but for infrastructure, for planning purposes, and in particular infrastructure and exactly what we're talking about, the more accurate of a read that we have on the population, I think the more accurate this goal setting then becomes. And I think I was kind of reading in between the lines of Mr. Aragon and what he was talking about, and just the way he was kind of meandering back and forth with these differences in household sizes. And so my question to the staff member here is the following. How do we know? I mean, it's one thing to have a camera, and as Committee Member McDonald was talking about, just that there's this GIS and you can see what kind of vegetation, and we're trying to refine this more using technology to set these water conservation goals. What happens if a household has an abnormally large household size? How do we know that they are conserving, but there might be 3 or 4 families in there? So if it's 55 gallons per family, per residence, whatever, how do we navigate? How do we determine that? Is it a holistic approach to say, okay, in this part of town or in these areas, they're much more densely populated. So there's kind of from a calculation perspective, we're going to take a statistical averaging. Is that what's done? Because I'm kind of curious how ultimately, if a much larger household size, how that's factored into these calculations.
Yeah, so for this specific topic, we are focusing on the residential outdoor use. For the overall water use target for the city, there will be an indoor use component. The state is still developing standards on how to calculate this for each water provider, and they will be coming out with these standards shortly, but they will be using a statistical analysis, like you said.
Okay, I just want to say to fellow committee members, I mean, I think that Committee Member McDonald kind of touched on the point, and he said, look, I'm going to support this, but I don't exactly like certain elements of this, which I interpret from what he's saying are somewhat invasions of privacy. And this, I would say, extends even further to how many people live in a household, and the very strict provisions in the California state constitution, which protect privacy. That's not in the federal constitution, but it's very much in the state constitution about protecting privacy. So sometimes I really wonder, when it comes to individual water use, just how effective is this going to be given the limits on what kind of data and what kind of analysis can the government collect? That's it.
Yes, it is important to remember it's an overall water use allocation, and it's an aggregate total.
Yeah.
So we won't be, requiring residents to report how many people are living in your house. And again, it isn't the residents' responsibility. I mean, it is. We want to encourage them to conserve water, but we as a water provider are responsible for meeting this water use target.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Schneider, I have a few questions, and if you could help us, and I believe it'll help the public. We often get pounded quite strongly for sole source authorization, meaning we only took one bid, or we only went with one bid. Can you explain how that happened in this matter?
Yeah, this happened in this matter because so DWR used aerial photography as their.
Can you explain what DWR
Yeah,
is?
sorry. Department of Water Resources, the California Department of Water Resources, who is creating these water use standards. They used Eagle Aerial as their sole source for to create their standards. And they used them because they have this 90 to 95% accuracy for vegetation and land classification, which no other software had. And in order to meet DWR, so Department of Water Resources standards, we also are using them as a sole source. Because let's say, we use a different type and the level of accuracy isn't there. And we want Oxnard to receive its fair allocation and be as accurate as possible, because we don't want to get a lower allocation than what we really should have.
Thank you very much for that explanation. I believe it's very helpful to the public, and I do appreciate the fact that we're going to try to use the very best software possible, because we don't want Oxnard residents to be shortchanged. We're stepping up to the table, and we expect our fair share.
Yeah, and we did a lot of work with the Oxnard GIS team and to see what we could do in-house, and how we could maybe do some of this calculation with them, and they agreed that Eagle Aerial was the best software for this.
If I can be so bold as to say, please express the thank you from this committee, this full committee, for the work that you did in getting this result to bring this to the table for us. Thank everyone involved. The question that Mr. McDonald mentioned about the privacy, I know that we're going to get questions about that. The water conservation rationale, I believe that possibly somebody today could answer the question, which counties in the state are still under water rationing, and is the water rationing look like it's going to change the situation with state water? My understanding, I believe that Ventura County is still under water rationing because they haven't come out of the water. The state of California has not deemed that there's been enough water rainfall to replenish that we don't have to worry about water rationing.
At this time, that is correct, Councilor.
Thank you very much. And that, again, goes to the public. This is not something that, what happened in the past, it's the past, it's still going on. With respect to the customer, there was a question from the public comment. How are they going to notify the customer if they have multiple people in the house or not people in the house? I believe they notify the customer through a utility bill. Is that a correct assumption on my part?
At this time, the utility billing does not collect data of the number of people living in a home.
So the only way to get a hold of the property owner or the homeowner at that time is utility bill?
No, yeah, we would not.
Okay, thank you. And the two last points. We've had a member of the public often come up, Mr. Lawrence Paul Stein often talks about gray water and how we can use gray water to potentially help replenish the groundwater and relieve our costs of purchased water. One of the things we found out that the more we conserve water, the more expense, because there are fixed costs that needs to be generated to recover those costs to operate the systems. But one, and I believe that's a if someone on staff finds that I'm wrong with that, please correct me now. Second point that I would like to make, which I think had possibly been missed, and maybe our city attorney can weigh in on this. With respect to the aerial photography, I'm a resident here. There are certain things that are private, certain things that aren't. But if the city is taking this action, we're going to take the private, we're going to take this and deem to the benefit of the majority, and water is one of the main things we need to live. And so we're looking at the water. But one of the things that the speaker, the public speaker brought up, which I found quite interesting, the backyards are paved over. There's a requirement in the city of Oxnard for residential units that a certain amount of open area for infusion of water is required in a residential unit. If we find that areas have too much paved over, will there be the ability to, instead of having to generate an entirely new process, why we have to go out and get more aerial photographies and duplicate the work, that we can, shall we say, kill two birds with one stone? If we find out that somebody's paved over their back 40 acres and they're not supposed to, that we can take some sort of action, as was mentioned, that somebody may, the public speaker again, may want to take out some of the concrete in the back. Those are my questions.
Sure, this is becoming more a discussion of code compliance priorities, and I think that you're turning this into a different matter rather than the approval of this contract. Now, the potential uses for code enforcement purposes, I can't speak to that off the top of my head. We'd have to bring the code enforcement folks into the discussion. But again, this is mainly a contract to help implement statewide policy, not about lot permeability on individual lots, but on just spotting consumption and vegetation uses.
Thank you, Mr. City Attorney. Thank you very much. I do think that the public speaker has opened up a can of worms here that will need to be addressed in the future. And if need be, I'll make the suggestion in the future we bring this up, because I do appreciate and respect the city attorney for trying to keep me out of hot water and violating any rules. So with that, do we have a recommendation from the city council?
Moved.
Committee? I beg your pardon, for the committee.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Member Flynn,
Aye.
Member McDonald,
Aye.
Chair Perrello.
Yes.
The motion to approve carries 3-0.
Thank you very much. And with that we do have again a public speaker on item 2 coming up, same individual, Mr. Aragon. Item 2, Public Works and Transportation Committee. The subject, purchase order to McLaughlin Waste Equipment Incorporated and Confab Manufacturing Company, LLC, for purchase of metal refuse containers.
Thanks for reading the recommendation, Committee Chair, and good morning, committee members. My name is Grant Dunn. I'm a management analyst with the Environmental Resources Division, and I'm here for Todd Housley, who couldn't make it today. Just to share some background, the Environmental Resources Division provides weekly collection to approximately 15,000 commercial accounts and multifamily dwellings with approximately 10,000 metal containers that serve these customers. We need to maintain a sufficient inventory for container exchanges requested by customers due to repair and replacement. Additionally, customers request metal refuse containers for special collections such as bulky waste and construction and demolition projects. AB 341 requires commercial recycling of businesses and multifamily units, 5 or more, generating more than 4 cubic yards of refuse per week. Now here's a photo of our refuse metal containers. And as you see, we have the comparison of the 2 and 4 yard bins. These bins are pretty much what you see at your commercial businesses and your multifamily dwelling units. Down below the 2 and 4 yard containers, we have the roll-off containers, and you can see the various sizes, 13, 30, and 40 cubic yards. These boxes are used at industrial complexes and yards. So for the competitive bid process, the Environmental Resources Division tag team with the Purchasing Division to issue a formal request for bid on June 11th. The deadline for vendors to submit was July 9th. The bid was posted on the city website and also on publicpurchase.com. 53 vendors received bid notification, and the city received 2 firms responding with bid proposals, McLaughlin West Equipment and Confab Manufacturing Company. Here are the bid results on 9 of the containers that we listed in the bid documents. And here it's we have quite a bit of information here. We went on a tiered pricing structure in order to get the best volume discount if we were to enter into those quantities. We are going with 2 different vendors because these 2 vendors had low bids on the various container items that you see on this slide. Our purchase plan for fiscal year 2021 includes 50 and 300 of the 2 and 4 yard containers. And then you see the industrial roll-off containers, 2, 16, 8, and 3 units for the 13, 30, 40 cubic yard and 40 cubic yard sealed container, respectively. The sealed containers used for mainly organics and wet waste, where the container needs to be sealed to contain the odors and any kind of liquids. Moving on to the financial impact. So the total cost of the combined purchase orders with McLaughlin and Confab will not exceed $1.2 million for the 3-year term of the purchase order. The spending plan for fiscal year 2021 is $400,000, and funds have been included in the Environmental Resources Fund budget. You can see the accounting and spending plan in the table below. Our commercial collection for $250,000 and industrial collection $150,000. Those are the operating accounts where the containers will be charged from for a total of $400,000. So this concludes my presentation, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Committee members, we have any technical questions before we get to the public speaker?
No.
No.
Okay, well, thank you. Mr. Aragon is a public speaker.
Hi, James. We're on item D2 now, and you have 3 minutes. Please begin.
Hi, I actually didn't remember signing up for this, but as soon as I heard my name, I'm like, oh, maybe I did. So this is not a controversial item. I'm just one of the things that I didn't understand was just kind of wondering what the split was between the containers needed replacing and those that are additions due to requirements of AB 341. The other curiosity I had, and one of the things that's nice, I think, going in the future that the city staff present is when anytime money's spent, understanding the financial analysis around it. Even though obviously it's not a private sector, there's no profits. Even when you're doing things to be in a compliance with some sort of regulation or state mandate, there's always a return, if you will. And I'm wondering like what the payback would be on these items and whether or not the payback matches the life of the containers, et cetera. That's all. Thank you.
Does any staff member want to take a shot at that?
Well, I can comment and answer Mr. Aragon's questions. The last one talking about the AB 341, which is a state mandate for all commercial and multifamily dwelling units that generate more than 4 cubic yards of refuse per week. So, oops. The state, this mandate is required by all local jurisdictions. So local jurisdictions managing their solid waste operations need to establish a recycling program for these accounts that qualify under the state mandate AB 341. So the city of Oxnard is working diligently in getting these commercial accounts with recycling programs. If we don't meet the mandate, the state of California has the right to issue penalties to that local jurisdiction that isn't making efforts toward the mandate. So that's really, and again, it's about recycling too. Recycling is a motivation in this. We're able to divert material from the landfill and save costs there. So with the recycling, the environment being a mandate, these are all incentives for the Environmental Resources Division to provide containers for these accounts. There is no reimbursement specifically from the state when we purchase containers to help meet our mandate for AB 341, if that answers Mr. Aragon's question. I believe the other question was on the split, going with 2 purchase orders, 2 vendors. And basically, we have 9 different sizes of containers that was disclosed in the bid documents. And we're simply taking the low bid from each vendor on the units that were disclosed, the container units that were disclosed in the request for bid documents. So I hope that answers Mr. Aragon's question as well.
I actually think the split question had to do also with how many of these new containers are replacing ones we have versus or additional based on the mandate.
I don't know the specifics of that. We do order, it's a combination of ordering new containers and containers that need to be replaced. I'd be glad to follow up on that answer if need be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dunn, the city manager. My committee members Do you have comments or questions?
I don't.
Mayor?
Yes, my question is, some of this might have been touched on, but the life of these containers and how, I know from requests that I get that, there's liquids that go into these containers, liquids result or from the trash and whatever will go in these containers, and they eventually eat out the bottom of the container, and they rust it out and everything. And I'm just wondering how we deal with that. That's just my question, how we prevent that. That's my only question about the longevity of them and how we can preserve them even longer based on best practices.
Well, very good question, Mayor. The containers take all kinds of different material in them, and the heavier, the wetter the material, the less durable the container can be. So the life cycle of a container, average-wise, might be actually 10, 15 years. But then again, if a container is being used frequently, some accounts have 3 to 4, 5 pickups a week just because they're doing so much material volume. So that in itself, with the front end loader truck picking up, setting down the container so many times, that can also increase the wear of the container. So you have, yes, definitely the type of material going into the bin, the number of times it's picked up. How do we take care? How do we deal with this? How do we extend the life of these containers? Well, we have a welding shop. We have a couple of welders who refurbish the containers. So if there's a sidewall on the container or a bottom, like you had mentioned, Mayor, that is, has been rusted, we can actually replace parts of these metal bins and get them out there in circulation. So in my report, I had mentioned that container exchanges are often requested by our customers and because of repair. And so, yeah, there'll be casters that are damaged, a bottom, a side, the lids, and we can refurbish these containers quite often to extend their life and get them back out there in circulation. There are times, though, when the container has been brought back several times to us and we just can't refurbish it anymore. So in that respect, we do a full replacement.
I see. And last question is, and it was an excellent answer. Thank you. The last question is, do we, because this is a capital cost and an expense, do we have certain, I'm just trying to figure out how to ask the question. Are there certain customers or certain industries where these cans, these containers, it doesn't matter what the size is, where they have to be replaced, actually, with they're being repaired? And does that factor into the cost of what we charge them and everything? Because I guess what I'm talking about is there's normal wear and tear, and then there's maybe abuse of these assets. How would you answer that?
Well, another good question, Mr. Mayor. We don't have a special charge for, say, a customer account that has a heavy waste, a wet waste, or a collection where you have a high frequency. We do have rates based on frequency of pickup. We do that, but to answer your question on impact and how that impact translates to perhaps another rate, we don't have something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Dunn. A couple of questions and a lot of it to address the public speaker. There were questions about, how long does the stuff last? and I'm reading directly, I'm hoping the public speaker took a chance to read the staff report. In order to provide weekly uninterrupted refuse and recycling collection to approximately 15,000 commercial and multifamily dwelling units. We're needing to get these serviced with approximately 10,000 metal containers. A sufficient inventory of containers must be maintained for container exchanges requested by the customer due to repair or replacement. And Mr. Dunn terrifically answered that question. So you brought up stuff, Mr. Dunn. I will share my personal experience with this. I did not work for the city of Oxnard's trash, but I did work for a large commercial carrier trash hauler here. And the public comment asked about payback. That can be determined in a lot of different ways, but I'll tell you how payback can work out to the benefit of the city of Oxnard and every individual resident in the city of Oxnard. You saw the pictures of the 2 and the 4 yard trash containers, and you heard Mr. Dunn mention casters. When those casters are broken or frozen, and it takes, at the time when I worked, it was called a swamper, a driver and a swamper. And the swamper goes into the enclosure, drags out the container, puts it in line so the driver can pick it up and empty the container. When those containers do not work, the fixtures on the bottom, the wheels don't work right, you're looking at a workers' comp claim for people that have hurt their back. Those can get quite expensive. And they hurt the city of Oxnard with their rates. So that's one way that there's a payback. The other is when we have trained and skilled drivers and operators that know how to pick up the dumpsters and dump the dumpsters and then place them gently on the ground without breaking the casters or the bottom framework of these containers. That is another way. There's a tremendous payback to the residents of the city. The payback can be looked at a lot of different ways, but when you need these things and when we have residents that are, scrounging through the trash, looking for different things, basically they're looking to make some money when recycling. I'd like to ask a question of staff. The containers that have passed their useful life, they have a scrap value, that the scrap value comes into the city of Oxnard's coffers?
Yes, that's correct. We
Thank you.
scrap all the parts, yes.
Thank you very much. Are the parts from the 2 companies that are going to be supplying us, are they interchangeable? Do we put that in our bid specs so that if we have, as you mentioned, we have crews that repair these things, do they have to have one universal part, or do they have to have part A for container A and part B for container B?
No, the specifications that we lay out in the bid document are very specific to our inventory. So we're able to use the parts need be to repair other containers.
Okay, and the only other point that I'd like to make out is the bottom of the wear and tear. These containers are used, and there are times when they're not used and they sit in our storage yard. During the wet time of the year, there may be a way that they can be parked so that they don't collect a lot of water in the container, so that when they're picked up, the container starts the actual rust process much more aggressively, and then they spill that large volume of water through the yard. That could be something to look at. I'm not suggesting spending a lot of money, just a little common sense to see how that can be done. I do appreciate the report, Mr. Dunn. Do we have a recommendation from the committee?
Move the recommended action.
Second.
Roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Member Flynn,
Aye.
Member McDonald,
Yes.
Chair Perrello.
Yes,
The motion to approve carries 3-0.
thank you very much. Thank you, committee. Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Moving on to item D3. The subject, amendment to Chapter 18, floodplain management of the Oxnard City Code. The recommendation that the Public Works and Transportation Committee recommend that the City Council approve the first reading by title only and subsequent adoption of an ordinance amending various sections of Chapter 18, floodplain management of the Oxnard City Code to comply with the current California Model Floodplain Management Ordinance.
Thank you, Chair Perrello. Good morning, Chair and council members. My name
Good
is
morning, Ms.
Tatiana
Arnott.
Arnaud. Thank you. Yes, I'm here to present to you the floodplain ordinance amendments, otherwise known as Chapter 18 of our Code of Ordinances. So as you stated, I'll reiterate, the recommendation is that the Public Works and Transportation Committee recommend that the City Council approve the first reading by title only and subsequent adoption of an ordinance amending various sections of Chapter 18 floodplain management of the Oxnard City Code to comply with the current California Model Floodplain Management Ordinance. So for some context, we have participated in the National Flood Insurance Program, which is administered by FEMA since 1979. As a participating community, we are mandated to adopt and enforce ordinances to reduce the risk of flooding and either meet or exceed federal requirements. And in return, FEMA does make flood insurance available to all property owners throughout the city. This does come at a discounted rate to us due to our standing in the community rating system as a Class 7 agency. This basically means that property owners that are required to obtain flood insurance receive a 15% discount on that flood insurance because of our standing in the CRS. So it's incredibly important to us that we maintain our standing not only in the CRS program, but also in the NFIP, which is a requirement to be in CRS. So here's a timeline of events leading up to today with regards to the updates to the actual flood insurance rating maps. As I mentioned earlier, we joined the National Flood Insurance Program in 1979, March 1st, 1979 to be specific. Then fast forward to 2008, where we adopted our current floodplain management ordinance. Then fast forward that another 8 years, on September 30th of 2016, FEMA released the new preliminary flood insurance rate maps. Then on May 26, 2017, FEMA officially notified the city of the changes in those firm maps. And a few days later, they actually, so FEMA, by they I mean FEMA, held a public meeting with the Oxnard residents affected by those changes in the firm maps. You did have Oxnard staff there present for that meeting as well. Then on August 23rd of 2017, the city held a community workshop in the HR activity room to further discuss those changes in the firms. And on September 5th, 2017, the cities of Ventura and Oxnard, along with the county, sent a joint letter to FEMA with technical comments and appeals for those maps. Then in February 2019, so fast forward about a year and a half later, the Oxnard Planning Department, as well as Public Works, held a public meeting to discuss those changes in the maps at Hollywood Elementary. However, due to the low turnout, Planning and Public Works staff sent a notice to the affected properties in April, notifying them of these changes as well. Then on June 30th of this year, I received an email from a FEMA representative regarding the changes to the Oxnard floodplain ordinance, which is separate but related to the changes in the firm maps. And this was an informal notice given to us with a heads up that the official notice was to follow. So now pretty much getting to my purpose here. About a month after I received the email from the FEMA representative on July 29th of this year, the city manager received the official letter from FEMA stating that there were no changes made to the preliminary firms as a result of any appeals or comments that were sent within the appeal period, and that they would be effective as of January 29th, 2021. Additionally, they also stated that by that same date, as a condition of continued eligibility in the NFIP, right? So this is where it becomes very important. To maintain eligibility in the NFIP, we must adopt or show evidence of adoption of floodplain management regulations that meet the standards of paragraph 60.3 D&E of the NFIP regulations. And so that's pretty much what I'm bringing here before you. There were some changes made to our ordinance based on FEMA comments that'll help us maintain our eligibility in the NFIP should we proceed with making these changes to the ordinance. So in summary, these amendments to the floodplain management ordinance relate to the addition of 2 new definitions, the modification of another 5, clarifications regarding the dates of the first adoption of the flood insurance study and the firms, clarification on the permit review process, clarification regarding freeboard requirements in Zone AO, clarification on standards for subdivisions, and the addition of regulatory floodway requirements within zones A1 through 30 and AE. None of these were substantial in nature. They were mostly clarifications, just to clean things up within our ordinance. I do want to bring up an additional community meeting that was coordinated by community development staff this past Thursday. And a community member did bring up a concern regarding part 10 of the ordinance. And so I am discussing this with our assigned FEMA agent, and I will bring any changes to that to the first hearing and let you know if there were any changes as a result of that conversation. As of right now, I don't anticipate anything changes, but I just wanted to apprise you guys of the fact that I am pursuing that currently. So to wrap this up, Section 18-9 of the current City Code, Chapter 18, already includes language that such that subsequent revisions of the flood insurance study and the maps are adopted by reference as the basis for establishing the areas of special flood hazard. Therefore, technically, there's no specific approval required from council for that specific action. But I do need to emphasize that approval of the FEMA recommended changes to the City Code Chapter 18 will support in meeting the requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program and maintain our continued eligibility to participate in it. This includes the community rating system. As you guys are probably aware, there are implications to these changes as they relate to development within those affected areas, which is mostly along the coast at Mandalay Beach Road. But those specific implications will be further discussed with the community as well as in the Housing and Economic Development Committee in the upcoming months, and not necessarily something that we would like to discuss for this topic here. There is no financial impact associated with this item. That does conclude my presentations. I can take any questions.
Madam Clerk, do we have, I see no public comments. Do we have any public comments on this?
No.
No. Any, okay, open council committee members?
I just have a couple of comments.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. McDowell.
I'm glad to see that we're going out to the public and talking to them and getting their input. And several years ago, FEMA came to us with some proposed floodplain map changes. And those changes were very onerous to a lot of property owners in that their flood insurance premiums were going to sometimes double or triple, depending on what FEMA determined. So I want to make sure that we understand that there is an appeal process to this whole floodplain map process. And I appreciate all the work that FEMA does, but sometimes I don't agree with their final analyses as to where they end up and how it impacts our community in terms of cost for floodplain insurance information, or costs rather. So I'm hoping that we're not just blindly accepting what FEMA says and saying, oh, okay, they say it, we got to do it. I think we really need to look at it with a third eye or third party eye and say, how is this going to affect our residents in terms of flood insurance costs? Is it going to bring new areas in? And what are all the ramifications of what FEMA is proposing? So those are just my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman McDonald, I can respond to that. So in September of 2017, the city along with the county did submit an appeal to FEMA regarding their new flood insurance maps. That is what I was speaking in terms of on July 29th, when the city manager received the letter from FEMA stating that there were no changes made to those maps as a result of any appeals or comments. I just want to let you know that yes, there was an appeal sent in, and it was a study that was done by Moffitt and Nickel. This was actually led by the county, but we were in support of it, and we actually we signed the letter with them. So we did do our due diligence in terms of making sure that we had a second set of eyes on these the flood insurance rate maps as well as the flood insurance study.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's nice to know that staff is being diligent and not just being told we need to do something, we do it. So I appreciate that response, Ms. Arno.
Ms. Arnott, may I just one more time? So we did have an appeal, and FEMA came back and said the appeal was baseless, or was valid? What, in plain English, what did they say?
Basically, they said that the way that they've performed their study is accurate, and what our appeal showed them in terms of the analysis, they did not agree to. And I could share that letter with actually anybody in the public. I could send that over to you, Mr. Perello.
I think that there's going to be a lot of people in the public, especially neighborhood council chairs in the areas affected that are going to be interested. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mayor, you have any comments?
Yeah, I just have questions. Ms. Arnaud, what did you say was going to be subsequently? You said you didn't want to get into it now because it's going to go to the Housing and Economic Development Committee. Is this about, could you tell me exactly what is going to go to the committee in this regard that you didn't want to have the focus with this particular item?
Yeah, so there's been a question about if it's going to affect building heights along the coastline. So any properties
Yes.
along Mandalay Beach Road as well as Capri Way who are affected by these maps, there may or may not be any building height implications associated with that. And so I know that that's a big concern of the community. So what I'm trying to emphasize is that this is not necessarily the place to talk about that. We are going out to the community and reaching out to them to have these discussions. And subsequently, we'll then go to the Housing and Economic Development Committee to discuss that very subject. It just so happens that this item does not does not relate to that on its own, right? This is just a regulatory requirement that we're trying to get through.
Okay, thank you. And then getting in just very quickly into the specifics, and I don't want a lengthy debate or discussion about the specifics, but could you just once again broadly talk about the amendments to sections of Chapter 18 that will comply with California's model floodplain management ordinances? How do you summarize those? Because I've been focused more on the background information and just going through that and really focusing on that and not on the actual larger issue of the amendments of Chapter 18.
Sure, I can go through those pretty quickly. So first and foremost, they added 2 new definitions. They're pretty basic. One is what is the definition of base flood elevation, and then they also asked us to add in a definition for variance, which is basically a grant of relief from requirements of this ordinance, which permits construction in a manner that would otherwise be prohibited by this ordinance, right? So it's your typical definition of variance. Then there was another 5 definitions that they wanted to clarify with respect to adding language such as or storage of equipment materials or materials. So I guess storage areas have been a subject of concern in the past, not just in our city, but just across the state. So they're going through city by city and amending their ordinances so that this is specified in there. And you'll find that actually throughout the whole ordinance where they want to clarify that. The other 2 major items are there was a conflict with the date at which we first entered the NFIP. That wasn't necessarily clear in the ordinance, so that's been clarified now and it's accurate. And then lastly, the addition of the National American Vertical Datum, or otherwise known as NAVD 88. So it's a survey datum point at which we establish the base flood elevation. So we say the base flood elevation has to be at elevation 20 based on the NAVD 88 datum point. So it's a transition from the NGVD 29 datum point, which is about 2.5 feet lower than this other datum point. So it's just a clarification on what basis of bearings are we working off of here.
Ms. Arnaud, I'm sorry, Ms. Arnaud, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I guess what I'm trying to better understand, because even your explanation, they're more technically oriented and there's real specifics. So I'm not really interested as much in those as I am the major policy implications, because I want to go back to committee member McDonald, and I think it's actually really good what he said, and maybe I should just stick with what he said, which is, we've got to take a second look at this because it will affect property owners, it will affect insurance rates. So maybe I'll go back to that comment that he made and try to get you to answer this first reading by title only that we're going to be recommending to the council. How does any of those things that you just said affect what committee member McDonald said? Because that's what he actually summarized it very well, what my concern is.
Sure. So there are no changes to any properties that were already affected by these firm maps. So again, this is just a clarification on things. There's no additional impacts based on these changes. Like I said, most of these are clarifications in nature.
I should have asked that from the very beginning. I deeply apologize for that, but it is Committee Chair Perello. It is helpful that this is brought back to us because I know that the chairman of this committee has been very active in this issue. And certainly the County of Ventura has provided a lot of great leadership in this regard. So I'm looking forward for future discussions coming before this committee to address exactly what Committee Member McDonald stated, just taking a third look at these things because they do have really large implications for the homeowners of the city of Oxnard and development. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ms. Arnaud.
Thank you. Thank you again for good presentation, Mr. Arnaud. I'm going to ask some questions. They may seem pointed, but they are not. If we can go to slide number 4. One of the things that I find as a committee member, and yeah, I've been involved in some of this stuff, so I have a little bit more knowledge. Can we go to slide, I beg your pardon, slide number 6. My mistake, slide number 6. When we use abbreviations as in number 3, point number 3, please explain FIS and FRM.
So FIS is the,
excuse me, I've given a heads up to the neighborhoods that are involved pretty much directly with this, that are willing to pay attention. Some are, some are not. But this will, as the other council members have said, it's going to affect.
sure. So FIS stands for Flood Insurance Study, and that's actually the study that establishes the new maps. So the firms, which are your maps, are the flood insurance rate maps that are established as a result of the flood insurance study that's performed by FEMA. And I have copies of every firm map from the inception of the NFIP here in Oxnard up to these new ones available in hard copy. That's one of the requirements, and I could share that with any community member, as well as the flood insurance study. That I have a hard copy and a digital copy of that I can share.
And I can share with you, Ms. Arnaud, you do a great job here. But in future presentations, and I'm sure there's going to be more, every time we use one of these acronyms, I believe we'd call them, please say what it is, because there are going to be people coming to this thing that are going to come with some knowledge and some misconceptions. And not everybody asks questions during the meeting. We need to get them to understand. The firm maps, my understanding from years ago, it was a height above the expected flood level. And now, from my understanding from what you've said, there has been a new height decided by FEMA. And this is not just for California. This is across the nation. Those are 2 questions.
Yeah, so they'll periodically go through any of the coastlines along the entire nation to reevaluate what those base flood elevations are. And it just so happens that they just did the coast starting in, or this California coast starting in 2016. But yes, this is a study that they go around through the whole nation along any coastline to establish these base flood elevations.
And thank you for that. And then if we can go to slide number 4, please. On slide number 4, we have a timeline there. Between 2008 and 2016, there was a meeting of FEMA came to the city of Oxnard and made a presentation at the brand new opened Oxnard High School. And it was the first meeting that, to my knowledge, at the Oxnard High School auditorium. Fantastic, brand new. You can still smell the paint. And FEMA was there, the county was there, the city was there. And I appreciate the way this is working to give residents an understanding that there are timelines to be met. At that particular meeting, the city of Oxnard, Councilmember Zaragoza and Public Works Director, Mr. Ortega, were at the meeting, and there was an assumption by them that there would be a 6-month time frame to work in. But in actuality, the head of FEMA informed them that the 6-month timeline stopped that night. They had 6 months to deal with this. It was not received well by the community. Led to organizations, and I was involved, called Flood Zone Justice. And they were able to stop certain things because there were tremendous people involved in that organization. And they put up money, and they got an attorney, and the attorney was able to get public television, PBS out of LA, and they went to Oakland and investigated, and some errors were found in maps. So there was a timeout. And the reason I only bring this up is because the information that is going out to some of the neighborhoods right now, the most recent was the Oxnard Shores Neighborhood Council. We need to have as many people aware as what's going on, because when you're dealing with deadlines, the federal government, the state, the county, or the city, deadlines are technicalities and they matter. And if you make a mistake, it matters. And you're answering to a lot of people that are not really looking for a, well, we'll give you a second chance. This is important stuff that we are bringing to the public, because it's not just important to the coast. It's important to the residents at that meeting, at that time, the 6,000 homes that were behind the levee called SCR 3, Santa Clara River 3. It's also important to the residents that are behind SCR 1, Santa Clara River 1, commonly called River Park, and what is going to happen to these residents and this new firms that are going in and how it will impact them. So I, for one, whether on the council or not on the council, I'm very interested, because this has, as my fellow council members have said, tremendous impact. And I will share one extremely enlightening conversation I had the opportunity to overhear. It was the FEMA director, Mr. Balomo, talking to two Oxnard City Council meeting members in a private conversation where we had a board of supervisor helping us, Mr. Bennett. And there were complaints that the community could not afford the insurance, could not afford to go into a flood zone, that it was a poor community, a heavily ethnic community. It did not have the wherewithal. And they were expectations of the electeds to be able to avoid having to go into floods. And there was a long pause. And there were a group of residents impacted listening in on that meeting. And Mr. Balomo explained that when Mother Nature decides to take whatever action she does, Mother Nature does not consider bank accounts or the color of skin. Mother Nature does what she wants to do. This impacts everybody. The people that will be impacted by a flood, the people that will live in the city that is impacted by a flood, and anybody paying attention to government, especially the electeds, whether they be elected council members or neighborhood council chairpersons. Thank you very much. I do appreciate this item coming forward, and I look forward to more information and information that I'm getting questions from residents behind SCR 3 and residents behind SCR 1 that want to know, when are we going to get the latest update of what's going on? Thank you. Do we have any further comments by committee members, or is there any response from staff?
Chair Perrella, the only thing I want to mention is that this does not affect anybody behind SCR 1 or 3. This is only affecting those along the coastline, so along Mandalay Beach Road as well as Capri Way. So I do want to emphasize that this item does not affect anybody in those other areas. So we can have a separate item come to committee regarding those two items, but this item in particular has no bearing on those two levies right now.
So the firm number that FEMA is now changing, the firm number will not affect SCR 1 or SCR 3.
Not at this time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have any comments by committee members?
I don't have any.
No comments.
Okay.
Move the recommended action.
I'll
Second.
second.
Oh, okay.
Roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Member Flynn,
Aye.
Member McDonald,
Yes.
Chair Perrella.
Yes.
The motion to approve carries 3-0.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Erna.
You're welcome.
The next item is item D4. Subject, review and prioritize council members' agenda requests. And I'm not sure who's going to be handling this one.
I have it, Chairman. This is the city manager. So we did this exercise this morning. So we're doing it throughout the committees today. This committee has the longest queue in terms of items previously requested. So I want to frame this by reminding you of the committee as a whole that you observed the overall council calendar several weeks ago, just so that to keep in mind the volume of work we have. So here is the list. There are 13 outstanding items, and I want to be clear that these are not prioritized. We just have the numbers there to make the communication during the committee easier. So these are not in order of priority, but we are asking you today to review this list and help us to prioritize so that we can get to work and bring these items back to this committee as soon as we can. So with that, I hand it over to the committee.
Okay. Speaking as the chair of this committee, I did have an opportunity to go through this exercise with the Finance and Governance Committee. The chair of that committee, Mayor Flynn, asked the individuals on the items that their name was associated, what they thought of the item, if it was still a high priority. I don't find that, I found that to be, worthwhile, but I do think that it is also worthwhile if each committee member to give guidance to the staff there are 13 items here. What do you feel are the highest priorities of these 13? If you can name them, say just for example, say number 7 is the lowest priority and number 4 is the highest priority. If you could help the committee with that. And we'll start with whoever wants to go first.
I'll defer to you. Yeah, I'll defer.
I'll start out, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Item number 2, the color-coded fire hydrants, we can take that off the list. I've been working with Jackie Irwin's office, and they're actually looking at a statewide legislation. So there's really not much sense us discussing it if the state is going to take an action. It just may be a little bit of time, but so we can free that one up. And I would like to see railroad quiet zones at a pretty high priority still, especially now that we have a traffic engineer that we can begin new conversations with the Port of Hueneme and see if there's something we can do, because it really is an impact, especially in the southern portion of our community. And those are my only comments.
How do you feel about well, we can do 2 rounds of this. We have time.
Okay.
Because later, figure out what do you think about the rest of them and how would you prioritize the rest of them? Okay, we'll go to Mr. Flynn.
So one of the things I see, one of the things I see with this is that items 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 also have finance related or dual interest here. And then items 5 and 6 are also for another committee, Community Services Committee. So, this is one of those things that it reminds me of the 5-year public works or capital investment plan. And it reminds me of like the prioritization of those items. And somehow I just a thought, because my name isn't assigned to any of these, but just as a thought is how do any of these align with the 5-year capital investment plan? And it would be kind of awkward that if there is something in here, and I haven't studied each and every one of them and then compared them to the 5-year capital improvement plan, but if in fact there are capital improvement related items, like as an example, number 8, funding for levy SCR 3. This is definitely a huge capital improvement plan, and then be important to see just what the priority is on the 5-year capital improvement plan. So anyway, enough on that. And then I'm wondering whether, as an example, Committee Chair Perello's update on medians and alley maintenance, I think that's important an important item, but I think this is similar to what happened in finance and governance, where I had an item where I dropped on medians that I think could very well be resolved after the November election if funding is restored for the medians. I wanted to comment on number 3, just very quickly. Update on the status of tree maintenance and city tree policy. When I interact with constituents, this is, especially since we reduced the water consumption by about half in the previous budget, I would imagine that. You hear me? Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. So what I wanted to say is, if I were to rank all of these, I really like what Committee Member McDonald talked about. I've been approached and talked to about the railroad quiet zones and crossing improvements. But the thing I hear most about that seems to affect the people of this city, of all of these things that we have, not that these other items aren't important, is the maintenance and status of trees and the city's tree policy, because something tells me that we have a misalignment with financial resources on the one hand, and on the other hand, the fact that we're a tree city USA. So those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and again, we'll have a second go around at this. Right off the bat, the things that I find extremely important, we have found that we have areas in the city of Oxnard that there is a very big question with the fire hydrant pressure. That is a health, safety, and welfare. That is a very high priority with me. Funding for the levy and SCR3, that's an extremely high priority to me. The other ones that I have asked for, I could see number 4, the update in the median and alleys maintenance. If Measure E passes, there could be taken care of. If it doesn't, it's not going to go away. But as our funds have not been, we have, as a council, have not prioritized alleys and medians in the past. I'm hoping Measure E passes so we can put something into there. The update on the stormwater runoff management, we have an issue with stormwater. To bring this in, and Mr. City Attorney, I may seem that I'm getting off base here, but this is where it comes from. We have a big issue with the amount of water that goes into the Channel Islands Harbor. And with what's happened to the Channel Islands Harbor since the shutting of the Mandalay power plant and the water quality, the amount of water that comes from the street runoff going into there, this is a big deal. It may end up being a way bigger deal than even I can imagine. The project labor agreements. I've been asking since I got on the council for a full tilt council discussion on project labor agreements. To me, that's a personal big deal. I want to have that happen. Allowing the neighborhoods to paint the curbs red. This could go to the finance committee, because for crying out loud, people are not supposed to park near a fire hydrant. The city does not have the resources to do everything they want to do. People flagrantly park near a fire hydrant. People flagrantly park around curbs. There have been accidents. To my knowledge, I don't know of any homes that have burned down because somebody parked near a fire hydrant. I'm told that they will simply break out the windows of a vehicle and get the hose to do what they need to do. But it makes the time lag much greater than need be. And there's supposed to be a law. You don't park in front of a fire hydrant. If we can get the neighborhood councils to agree to do the labor, I don't understand why the city can't cough up with the red paint. And the adopt a route, number 13. I know it appears I have the lion's share of things here. I do not understand how, when we have 1,200 employees and they drive to work, how those employees, and we have a 311 program that works very well, how those employees may not be in the contract, but just adopt a way you're going to work. When you see graffiti, when you see a tree that's dead and it's been dead for years and it's fallen over, make a phone call, for Christ's sakes. Get it in the queue so it gets taken care of. It would be amazing the difference that that could make. And yes, it would possibly be off the clock on your way to work or on your way home. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm addressing this for employees. You need to remember, the city of Oxnard pays you. You work for the residents in Oxnard. Some of you are residents, some of you are not. But this does not seem going above and beyond, especially if you go the same way twice a day. I mean, I'm sometimes drive with blinders and it's not a good deal, but I believe that this could help our city tremendously. We have individuals, Marvin Booz is the classic example. He is out there busting his back, trying to make the city look better. And a simple 311 call on some of these matters would go a long way. And for those of you that are interested, you can check into 311 and see who logs and what the logs are about. And those are my first round of questions. Mr. McDonald, do you have any prioritization of all of these others than which you talked about?
I would be interested first in the tree maintenance. And the reason I bring this up is several years ago, we were told that the city had a list of approved arborists, and if private homeowners wanted to hire an approved arborist to trim the trees on the public right of way in front of their house, the parking strip, that was allowable. Well, I've since checked and apparently we don't have a list. So sounds like someone in the past maybe did not quite give us past correct information. So I think that would be important. In terms of the fire hydrant parking and painting the curbs, just an anecdotal note, California law does not require a red curb to make it illegal to park in front of a fire hydrant. If you park in front of a fire hydrant, whether the curb's painted or not, it's a violation, and they should be getting tickets. Now, whether PD has the ability to enforce that or the labor power to enforce that is a whole different story. But a red curb is not mandatory, it's not required. And I know that you had brought up about the rail lines going between Ventura and Castaic. I sent you some information on that. I think there's a lot of moving parts there, and I think that's going to be something for other agencies to discuss before it gets to us. So I would probably put that lower down on the priority list. And I think those are most of my comments at this point.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, do you have any
Yes.
ranking priority?
Yes, I like what Committee Member McDonald said about the tree policy. And out of all of these, I agree with the fire hydrant thing too. I'll get into that. But out of all of these, I think number 3 has the most immediate effect. And like I said, when I'm interacting with people in a variety of ways, I mean, this tree issue is one of the top constituent requests that I get. And I really think we need to take a better look at it. And also exactly what Committee Member McDonald said, having an approved list of arborists that can go out and do various things to trees. And it just seems so ridiculous that if we don't have the funds to maintain some of these trees, that if people want to pay for it themselves to do it, and there's an approved list, this is kind of like volunteerism. This should be something we should have been on that right away. I think Committee Chair Perrello, the project labor agreement thing you've brought this up. Various members of the council have mentioned this. I really personally think that should go to the Finance and Governance Committee before it is talked about at Public Works, but that's up to the committee or whatever. And it's the other thing, last comment I wanted to make is about Committee Member McDonald's comments about how the fire hydrant areas don't need to be painted. What it would appear to me is that I could be wrong, but the reason why they're painted is that it gives very clear, and it's in red, is it gives very clear direction to people not to park there. And but if they, and so very few people know what the ordinance says about how close can you get to a fire hydrant. And so I agree, it's good that I hear this, that the law doesn't say that you have to have it painted red, But if in fact we're going to begin enforcing it, which I support that 100%, any way we can, we need to start enforcing this and then figure out how to best do it. So those are my priorities.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I may, so I'm getting a clear sense of the priorities here, and I just want to keep us on task of prioritizing these versus discussing them in substantively. The items 3, 4, and 7 regarding the status of the maintenance cycles, as well as the tree policy, the maintenance cycle for trees, medians, alleys, and stormwater runoff. We're going to have to do that regardless of the outcome of Measure E. It's just the outcome determines what it is that we bring back to you. But I want to be clear, those are going to be coming pretty quickly after November, because we have to plan for that based on whatever resources we have or do not have. So those will be coming.
Thank you. Again, the priorities, as I see them working from the numbers, the fire hydrant pressure in certain areas, I believe it's 15 areas. I've spoken to the interim past fire chief and the current interim. They're supposed to be dealing with this. These residents need answers. So health, safety, and welfare of the employees and the residents and the property protection of the areas involved. The policy on naming memorials for public property. We did have an issue where there were requests to name various things. And there were, what is the policy? I wished we had a set policy. How many does the person, how does that work? It's not the highest priority of these lists, but I do believe Mr. Madrigal put that on there. I believe it needs to be addressed.
Sir, Mr. Chair, this request is not about the naming of public buildings. We actually have that policy already. This is specific to memorials placed on public property. I believe.
Oh, is that like the sign somebody died in a
correct? Correct.
Oh, all right. Okay. I do acknowledge that in Rio Lindo, that is a big issue. There's been some very harsh words on that. So, okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. The other thing is, as far as working to improve our city, jobs, business, the quiet zones on the rail, those are all worthwhile things. And Mr. McDonald is right. He did send me information. It does look like it's going to be a bigger issue, but I can definitely see this is an issue, getting that rail line so that we can take our port of Port Hueneme, go directly to Castaic, and all of the commerce that would be generated from our port and potential jobs from our community would benefit from that. I think that's an elephant worth taking a shot at eating an elephant. It may take a while, but I think that there should be efforts put into that. And that's the final of my comments on that.
As long as it's one bite at a time.
Well, that's, you don't get indigestion and yeah, I got it. But if we do take it one bite at a time, the story goes, eventually you can consume that like the pushing over a rubber tree. They eventually do it. I forget what the name of the song is, but okay.
I hopes.
I hopes. That's it. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Thank you.
And the thin man's dog was named Asta.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'm glad you brought that up about the extension of the railroad, and I'll just say that one of the criticisms by the port members, those that serve on the port as commissioners, has been maybe the lack of synergy between the city economic development and then the port and everything else. So I think that would probably be looked upon very positively if we did do that, what you mentioned about it, for being able to extend the railroad, number one. And then to end with that, I would say that it's probably going to have a lot to do with grant funding. Maybe it's a joint application by the city and the port. But anyway, I think it is a very valid priority.
Okay, thank you. And I know Mr. McDonald has done a lot to try to get answers for that, but I think it's an important issue, and I feel comfortable that the three of us feel that way. Are there any further comments by the committee members or anything from the general manager?
Nothing from the city manager either.
Okay, hearing nothing, do we have a recommendation?
I thought we were just
Right.
giving guidance to the city manager, and we've done that.
That's correct. No vote is needed for this.
Okay,
Thank
thank you very much. Thank you. With that, do we have any recommendations for future items on an agenda for besides what we've just talked about?
I don't.
Okay, neither do I. Mayor?
Nothing. Thank you.
Okay, with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.